pleasant good afternoon and welcome once again, friends, to a special edition of West Indian Today, coming to you in the kind courtesy of the ITV Gold family and also Parikh Worldwide Media. We want to say thank you to our chairman, Padma Shri Dr. Sudhir Parikh, our chairman and founder of Parikh Worldwide Media, for ensuring we're able to bring this very special discussion into your homes through the means of your television sets. And of course, thank you to the staff and management. And for the past few months, as most of you know, like right around the time during the public advocates race, for those of you who remember during my coverage of the public advocates race at that time, spontaneously I was in conversation with one of the candidates for the Queens District Attorney, who was none other than Betty Lugo. And when I spoke to her, that was the first time I really got to know what the Queens District Attorney, I mean the position of Queens District Attorney, what is actually the role of that person, and what do they do basically. And so as the months have gone by, we've continued to enlighten you more and more about it. Reminder that the primaries is coming up for the Democratic, for all the candidates, and most of you must have been seeing the debates on New York 1, as well as all the other debates hosted in honor of the Queens District Attorney, so for that race. And a reminder that the Queens DA is it's actually the top-ranking law enforcement official here in the borough of Queens. So joining with me right about now on deck, I have one of the candidates who's actually looking to seek your vote in the primary and also in the general election as well. She's a lecturer at Harvard University, and I believe that she was a senior, maybe she still is, a senior advisor for the Fairness Punishment Project, none other than Mina Malik. So I want to say welcome to you, and it's of course, with much recommendation, this interview took place. Actually, it's taking place here today, and I'm very delighted to talk to you about your agenda and also the issues that you are advocating for. So welcome to our show. The Queens District Attorney is an election. It's a special election that happened this year, as the former Queens DA, that was actually Richard Brown, I believe, announced that he will not seek another term. Unfortunately, the former Queens DA passed away in May of 2019, with Tiffany Caban and also Melinda Katz being what some would say the likely frontrunners. Is it possible for Mina Malik to pull off the upset in the primaries?
Absolutely it is. Misconceptions here in this particular race is that there are only two frontrunners, right? Melinda Katz and Tiffany Caban. Right. And for whatever reason, it's been portrayed that way in the media, and thank God you're here, Imran, to make sure that that is righted, because it is not just between Tiffany Caban and Melinda Katz. We have to look at this race through the lens of qualifications, as well as experience and expertise in criminal justice, criminal procedure, and criminal law. And that is extremely important in this race, because it is the top law enforcement official, as you said, in this county of 2.4 million people. And Queens County is made up of the most diverse county in the country, if not the world.
Not too long ago, you spoke about Rikers Island being inhumane. Inmates are treated like animals, treated like barbarians. So what's your plan, actually, or what's your whole idea with Rikers Island? I mean, if we close Rikers Island down, where do we put the inmates?
So one of the important things to note is that the district attorney has no jurisdiction over closing Rikers down or not, right? It's become a very hot topic in this particular race and this election, so much so that I decided on my own to host a panel discussion with criminal justice reformers as well as formerly incarcerated individuals to talk about Rikers Island and what needs to be done. And Rikers Island is absolutely an abomination. I would not want my children there, my two sons there. I wouldn't want your family members there. It is unfit for human beings. But the question is, as you posed it, what happens to Rikers Island? I firmly believe it should be shut down. I do not agree with the current plan that the mayor has of building a mega structure of a jail facility. I do think that what is important is that when you're talking about building a borough-based jail, yes, there are pros and cons to it. The pros are the people who are detained are more connected to their families, more connected to their support networks and their support systems, as well as their legal counsel. And ostensibly, that means that they will not recidivate in the future because they stay connected to their families. There's also the understanding that they don't have to travel as far, right? Because the idea is building a borough-based jail near the courthouse in the county, which is in Kew Gardens. And so we spend $42 million a year on transportation costs from Rikers Island to each of the 5 court facilities throughout the 5 boroughs, and that money could be better spent elsewhere. But when we're talking about borough-based jails, it's extremely important to have community input. And I cannot stress that enough, because as we've seen recently, particularly with the Amazon deal, there wasn't community input. And that's what's important, is that people in the neighborhood where this proposed jail is going to be built, this detention facility, needs to have their say.
Okay, so when we talk about the detention facility, and of course, as you mentioned about Rikers Island, many people feel the same way as well, that, okay, it's inhumane and it's unfair to the inmates. But when we think about it too, I mean, I believe sometime a few months ago, out of the mayor's office, there were talks about basically creating humane jails and giving all the inmates free phone calls, I believe, in terms of staying more connected with their relatives on the outside. Do you support that?
In hosting this panel, which was called Justice by Design, right, and it was a mini documentary done by Public Square Media. I encourage you to look at it and all your viewers to look at it. It talked about building a detention facility that was more humane for human beings in terms of its structure, in terms of its design, more open and airy, more interaction with the guards as well as the people who were being detained. And so it's important for us to treat people like human beings. If we expect them to go back into society and become productive members of society, we have to treat them like human beings and offer them a pathway of opportunity and success. And so one of the things that I advocate for is to make sure that pathways of opportunity and success are offered to people who are incarcerated, whether it's through job opportunities or education, because the goal as district attorney is to make sure that people don't come back into the system.
So pathways to opportunity, and of course I'm very happy that you touched upon it, because that's a major issue amongst many people in the community. But when we think about violent offenders, I'm going to use like that term, and we think about police officer familia in the Bronx. Now, pathway to opportunities for people who are basically, violent against the police. I mean, there's a movement called Blue Lives Matter. So what do we do in terms of those people? Opportunities.
Well, I firmly believe in making sure that people are held accountable for their actions, particularly when we're talking about violent offenders. Right. They must be held accountable for their actions. But at some point in time, people are going to come back into the communities, and we have to set them up for success. We cannot forget about them and say, you know what, we're going to lock them up, throw away the key, and forget about them. And I'll give you a prime example. I was Deputy Attorney General for Attorney General Karl Racine, the first Haitian elected Attorney General for Washington, D.C., and we had a program where we decided that we were going to hire formerly incarcerated or formerly justice-involved individuals. And the whole idea behind that is to make sure that they had these pathways of opportunity and success, and not to set them up for failure once they went back out into the community. So my executive assistant, he was formerly incarcerated and was formerly justice-involved. We started a restorative justice and victim services unit in the Attorney General's office, and 3 of the restorative justice coordinators in that unit were also formerly incarcerated and justice involved. So it's extremely important to remember that we have to make sure that we're offering them a road to positive action and a road to success.
All right, so that sounds really good, but with plans and agendas like that, now one of your opponents, and of course, I'm sure that there's going to be lots of mudslinging and, things, someone criticizing another person's agenda, but Betty Lugo, she said that of all her candidates, she considers herself to be a moderate, and she said that everyone else that's running in this race is weak on crime. Now, of course, if she were to listen to your plan with, pathway to opportunities, and she describes that as being weak on crime, your response to that?
Absolutely, it's not weak on crime. It is making sure that people do not re-enter the criminal justice system and offering them some sort of services so that they can live a positive life and be reintegrated into society. And I've spent my entire life keeping our community safe. I have not only worked on the defense side as part of the DC Public Defender Service, where I started my career, I've also been on the prosecution side. I spent 15 years at the Queens District Attorney's Office, making sure that we kept violent offenders away from our women, our children, and our senior citizens. So my specialty was child homicides, child physical sexual abuse, adult sex crimes, human trafficking cases happening right here in Queens County, and crimes against our senior citizens. And so, having worked both alongside police officers and holding them accountable, making sure that justice is done in every aspect, I am far from being soft on crime. I think what needs to be noted is that this is a way we can be smart on crime.
So as we're talking about that, and as I want to move on to another topic actually on your agenda on your website, elimination of economic oppression. Now, you spoke a lot about it on your website, so tell us about that. I mean, and as the Queens DA, what's your take on that whole thing?
So one of the things that we're looking at, and there was a new criminal justice reform bill that will go into effect on January 1st, 2020, is eliminating cash bail. And when we talk about eliminating cash bail, we are removing a poor person's tax, basically, so that they're not penalized because they cannot pay a bail amount to get out of jail. So under this new plan and under this new law, the whole idea is that the presumption will be that people will be released on their own recognizance or be released using the least restrictive means necessary to ensure that they come back to court for their court date in the future. And again, this is a way of decarcerating, making sure people stay connected with their families, their friends, their legal counsel, and making sure that they don't lose their jobs or their education. Because studies show that sometimes when people are incarcerated, within a few days, they lose their jobs, they lose their educational opportunities, and sometimes even their child custody.
All right, when we talk about ending cash bail, I believe that was a huge debate, a huge issue at the debate in New York 1 with over Board President Melinda Katz, because previously her position on it was to end it for misdemeanors and nonviolent offenders. So where did the Board President go wrong with her previous take on that?
I think she sort of flip-flopped, on what her stance was from the start of this campaign until this point in time. Right. And so I think two of the other candidates, Rory Lansman as well as Tiffany Caban, called her out on her flip-flopping on her stances. But what's important to note is that this criminal justice reform bill that's going into effect in January 1st, 2020 will address a lot of the issues and will address cash bail not only for low-level offenses but all the way up to high-level offenses and felonies.
All right, so when we talk about Tiffany Caban and also Board President Melinda Katz, all of you, you guys have progressive agendas. Now, some might say to themselves, actually, that are all the candidates trying to outdo each other? Well, who can be more progressive than the other? Your similarities and differences when it comes to Tiffany Caban and also Melinda Katz, I will exclude Betty Lugo since she calls herself a moderate. The two other female candidates they regard themselves as progressive. So your similarities to both candidates mentioned.
My similarities are actually that, a lot of us are talking about criminal justice reform, but no one has really implemented it, right? I actually have implemented criminal justice reform. I was special counsel to Brooklyn DA Ken Thompson, where we started a conviction review unit in 2014. And in the 5 years since we built that unit, we have exonerated and freed 26 wrongfully convicted people in Brooklyn. Queens needs a conviction review unit. It is the only county in this city that does not have a conviction review unit. So I'm familiar with how one should be built and structured to make sure that there are no outside influences influencing these claims of wrongful conviction and whether the convictions should stand or not. Another way that I differentiate myself from Tiffany Caban and Melinda Katz is I've already worked on a low-level marijuana decriminalization policy. Correct, yes. with DA Ken Thompson when he was the district attorney in Brooklyn. We were the first district attorney's office in the country to make sure that we said we're no longer prosecuting low-level marijuana possession offenses because it disproportionately affects our youth as well as our black and brown communities of color. And as Deputy Attorney General, I've already instituted a lot of the criminal justice reforms, again, that everyone in this race is still talking about. anti-truancy initiatives to break the school-to-prison pipeline, diversion courts, such as mental health community court, as well as expanding drug court, and creating a Hope Court to deal with young human trafficking victims as young as 11 years old. But what is most notable is that I have the experience to lead this organization, Imran, and I cannot stress enough how important that is. We're talking about the largest law office in Queens County, 600 employees, 300 attorneys, 300 unionized workers. I've already led a citywide agency. With all due respect to the borough president who's led the borough president's office, I've led a citywide agency of 200 employees and a $16.5 million budget. I helped DA Ken Thompson run the day-to-day operations of the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office with 1,200 employees, and as Deputy Attorney General, I was responsible for 110 employees.
Part of your agenda is also to be tough on violent offenders, and when we think about it, earlier, about a few months ago, Governor Cuomo introduced, or he's basically said that anyone who's been convicted a second time of a sexual assault or sexual offense will not be allowed to travel via MTA. Now, conservatives who are looking and listening to, the governor saying that, and when they're reading your plan or your whole agenda, and they're saying that, well, okay, based on what the governor is saying and progressives trying to be tough on violent offenders, do you think that a person should be, after one sexual assault, that they should still be allowed to travel? Give us your take on that, like on MTA. That's what he said. After a second time, they will not be allowed.
I spent the majority of my career as a special victims prosecutor and a sex crimes prosecutor. I think we really need to be careful when we start putting limitations on people and how they can travel and what they can do, particularly after they've already paid their debt to society. Okay. Yes, we want to hold people accountable for their actions. Yes, we want to make sure that whatever the punishment is coincides with the offense that was done. But yes, we want to make sure that where we can rehabilitate people and help them get back into society, we're actually doing that. So we really need to be careful about what we're talking about, and I would love to review the bill that you're proposing and that you're talking about, but it's something that we have to do delicately, right? Is balance public safety with criminal justice reform.
About 2 years ago, I remember when Mayor Bill de Blasio was up for his reelection, one of the campaign, or one of the things that he was writing on is that it's the first time in the city that the crime rate is extremely low and there are less and less arrests. However, some of his opponents said that, well, crime is low because not a lot of people are reporting it, and that goes to in regards to crimes taking place in the subway. Also, police brutality, and also, holding the police accountable. You've spoken a lot about that. So give us your take as elected as Queens DA. Where do we hold the police accountable, and what do we do about those who are acting, who basically exhibit misconduct to the residents of Queens?
So I grew up in the 1980s and the 1990s, Imran, and at that point in time, it was extremely, extremely dangerous in New York City. We had 2,000 murders citywide. But it is no longer the case in terms of criminal justice and the crimes that are being committed. So we need to move along with the times, right? And we need to make sure that we're still holding people accountable, but crime is way, way down now. And I don't think it's because that people are not reporting crimes. Certainly there are certain situations where people decide they're not going to report crimes. One example is when people have a questionable immigration status. Sometimes they do not want to report crimes or come to law enforcement, come to the district attorney's office or report to the police because they're afraid that their families are going to be broken up, that they will be arrested, detained, and deported. And I've dealt with so many sexual assault victims who were afraid of participating in the trial process, the grand jury process, and the criminal justice system because they were worried about that. My reassurance to the immigrant communities is that they don't have to worry about that when they're coming to the district attorney's office under my leadership. We need to make sure that people are held accountable for their actions and making sure that we're keeping the public safe. With respect to police misconduct, I was the head of the Civilian Complaint Review Board, the largest police oversight agency in the country. And while I was there, we had thousands of complaints of police misconduct. It is extremely important that the district attorney's office has the backbone and the wherewithal and the strength to hold officers accountable for their misconduct where necessary. I've already done that. Again, the Eric Garner case that was just done, that case was tried recently because of my leadership at the Civilian Complaint Review Board. I personally met with the medical examiner in that case as the head of the agency and went over the autopsy report. And under my leadership, the officer in that case was found liable for the actions in Eric Garner's death and has since gone to trial, and now we're awaiting the verdict.
Would you order certain police officers to be retrained once again, or do you think that they should be suspended and taken off the force?
Well, one of the things that I plan to do is start a Civil Rights and Integrity Bureau, right, which looks at claims of police misconduct as well as public corruption. And certainly where there are valid claims of police misconduct, we would make a recommendation, if we weren't going to prosecute the case criminally, to the New York City Police Department and its leadership in terms of what can be done in terms of retraining. So as the head of the Civilian Complaint Review Board, we actually looked at the data and looked at police misconduct complaints, identified those officers that were always found involved with police misconduct complaints, and not necessarily substantiated, but involved with police misconduct complaints, and advised on how people could be retrained so that they wouldn't be a product of a misconduct complaint in the future.
All right, so we're actually coming down to the end of the discussion. I mean, the time went by so quickly, and I enjoyed listening to you and listening to your take on so many issues. As we are wrapping up, I want you to make an appeal to all our viewers. You can actually look at the camera and reach out to all our viewers and remind them about the date of the primaries and also certain issues that we did not discuss in this interview that you think it's important that they should know. Basically, if you are elected, you'll represent them as a Queens DA, any of those, and once again, I mean, how they can support your campaign along the way. So you can go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is an extremely important election that is coming up. The primary date is Tuesday, June 25th. We have 10 days to go. There has not been a competitive race for this particular seat since 1977, 42 years ago. We have the opportunity for change, and change must come now. This seat has never been held by a woman, and it's never been held by a person of color. This is an opportunity for us to have representation in government and in criminal justice, and this most important seat in this county of 2.4 million people. One of the things that I plan to do is that we didn't discuss about today is to make sure that immigrants are protected, that the courthouse is a safe haven, not only for victims, not only for witnesses, but also for people who are accused of crimes who are simply coming to the courthouse to answer to the crimes and charges against them. My goal is to make sure that we are keeping our immigrant communities safe and making sure that we're keeping our families whole. I also want to make mention of being on the campaign trail where I've talked to so many people who were victims of hate crimes or bias-related incidents. And my plan is to shore up the Hate Crimes Bureau to make sure that we are defending people who have been victimized by hate crime, whether it's because of their religious affiliation, their race, where they've come from, their accent, anything of that nature. It is extremely important that we protect our immigrant communities and make sure that we are serving the public well. And so I ask you to come out and vote on June 25th. It is extremely important. The one final thing I will say is our for-hire vehicles, such as our yellow and green cab drivers, our Uber drivers. Of course, all of those folks also are probably sometimes discriminated against and assaulted, including our MTA transit workers. We need to make sure we are keeping our MTA transit workers and our for-hire vehicle drivers safe, and I plan to do that as district attorney.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Mina Malik for Queens DA, and of course, as she told you of the date of the primary. So all that we have to say to all of you is go on out and vote, and we're encouraging you to be sure to cast your vote for Mina Malik, and of course, Miss Malik in this race. We're extending our hands to you in support and also good wishes, and we do hope that the next time that we do speak to you, we'll basically announce you as Madam Queens DA. So all our best wishes are with you. And good luck in this race.
Thank you so much, Imran.
Thank you. And of course, thank you to your campaign team, and also a special thank you to Mr. Nicholas Christopher Ruga. With that, it's officially our time to go. We've enjoyed our time spent with you here for today's program.